Enjoy the video!
Hey everyone, today we are doing an APUSH Period 7 presentation by Ira, Fresca, and Anthony. So for the class-assigned essay, The Progressive Era to the New Era, 1900 to 1929, our first point is
a revolution in organization. The builders of the modern corporate corporation set out to replace unsteady partnership and credit systems, of which include extensively funded, more intensely managed, and national in scope and market in the aftermath of the 1890s slump. The economy was controlled by corporate giants in production, communication, banking, life insurance, by rich people like J.P. Morgan. There were enormous level of economic operation which demanded a much more organized approach. Progressive reformers tried to improve the capacity of governments to deal with the worst effects of scarcely regulated capitalism. Between 1900 and 1929, they were successful in establishing most of the traits of the modern administrative state. Workers were now protected from dangerous working conditions, physically grueling hours, and industrial diseases. The second point is the progressive politics. Dozens of new civic reform organizations came up to bring a new economic and social issues into political spotlight. Many different reforms ended up borrowing different techniques and success. During this time, people wanted a more active government that would work its way up to national politics. Since the Civil War, no president has been as active and focused on issues as Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt wanted to protect the environment, while Cleveland offered federal forces to end the National Railroad strike in 1894. Progressive reform were successful. They were able to move election, institute new system, and break corrupt alliances. They also fought for women's suffrage, and in 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed. They also strengthened voting registrations and kept out immigrant voters. Thirdly, immigration. Between 1900 and 1914, more than 13 million immigrants arrived in the United States, mostly from Central and Southern Europe's remote region. The new economy was built on immigrants' cheap labor of foreign-born employees. The new urban working class gave birth to new types of poverty and ghetto life, but it also gave birth to powerful political machinery, fervent labor unions, and a socialist party that rivaled any outside of Germany, mostly on approach of the First World War. The urban people were occasionally viewed as political allies by middle-class progressives. Progressives considered the urban poor as objects of social concern, populations to be integrated, improved, and safeguarded from the exploitative employers, landlords, and political masters. Progressives were more interested in trust in a single public good than of class justice. They were more concerned with mediation and efficient management than with protected rights. While placing trust in specialists, science, and common good, they were able to construct the state's ability to counteract social fate and private capital. Fourthly, the international stage. In the early 20th century, Americans wanted to enhance the country's ability to more strongly project its interests abroad. William Howard Taft led a committee to create an American-style form of imperial government in the Philippines to free Cuba from Spanish tyranny in 1898. In 1906 to 1929, the U.S. sent troops to Mexico and the Caribbean to seize houses, reorganize finances, or try to affect the result of local revolutions. Wilson attempted to trade neutrally with rebels, which failed in 1917. The government entered the war committed to transform into a productive social machine for national advancement. When the nation's railroads were temporarily nationalized to coordinate transportation, People had different jobs from what they were already working as to help the new military recruits for the war. The war provided a model for the efficient mobilization of resources. During the time of the First World War, there were many resources and it helped reforms to manage international issues more efficiently. Fifthly, post-war America. One of the most chaotic years of the 20th century was 1919, when the war economic machine came to a stop. There were many withdrawals that caused worker strikes that continued to get out of control. Workers attempted to build on the wartime victories against employers, but the Justice Department deemed it radical and disloyal without trial. White mobs went to African American cities where violence erupted, destroying homes and killing people. After Harding's death in 1923, Vice President Calvin Coolidge took over as president. He was also re-elected in 1924. He was not a fan of active government, but his Commerce Secretary Engineer Herbert Hoover was. The Reconstruction Finance Administration was all Hoover to re-stabilize finances. Women understood the era's complex changes than men. A lot of the radical social reforms were urged by middle-class women. Women always wanted to dominate social spaces, such as organizations and universities, social gospel churches, and the social work professions. Lastly, consumer culture. Women were both objects and subjects in this century for the entertainment and consumption industry. Music halls, comedy, amusement parks, dance clubs, the flashy movie palace, and radios changed the entertainment industry between 1910 to 1920. By 1920s, they were more involved in a culture that was more commercialized and purposely arranged with African American jazz and dance music, Yiddish comedy, and cinematic idols who flaunted their foreignness. In the 20th century, economy, material goods, and household consumers were very popular. The economy was bringing forth capital, production, and advertising in everyday life.
Okay, so for the claim, despite living in the United States where it's considered as the land of the free, minority groups still face the challenges of everyday living in the country, such as the women's suffrage movement and the Japanese internment.
Here is our main essay, Modern Women Persuading Modern Men, the 19th Amendment and the Movement for Women's Suffrage, 1916 to 1920. Our first point is the Women's Suffrage Movement. The National American Women Suffrage Association is an organization led by advocates for women's suffrage, which was founded by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony in February 1890. In September 1916, the president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, Carrie Chapman Catt, announced an emergency meeting for the organization's executive council. This addresses their unsuccessful attempts in protest to grant women the rights to vote. The protests are known as the Women's Suffrage Movement. This particular movement has been going on for decades to achieve their goal for women in the United States. Moving on, our second point is the winning plan. Despite the struggles and challenges the women and advocates face, the movement was still in motion. Now with Catt as the leader of the organization, she led the movement and delivered her remarkable winning plan at the National American Women's Suffrage Association's convention in Atlantic City in 1916. Her plan was to gather enough states to support the women's suffrage in order to ratify and create a federal suffrage amendment. As a result, the winning plan is indeed a success. Finally, it leads up to our third and final point, which is the 19th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. In 1918, the House of Representatives passed the amendment, while in the 1990, the process of the submission of the amendment to the states occurred. Finally, on August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, and from then on, the women's suffrage movement came to an end.
So our first document is the Japanese internment, 1942. Situation. The Japanese in the U.S. had to follow government orders, and in doing so, they had to leave their homes, properties, businesses, and livelihoods. Usually, if they had friends, the friends were the ones that took care of their properties and businesses when they were gone. Purpose. The purpose of the Japanese internment document was to instruct and direct the Japanese on what they were allowed to bring, as well as to inform them that they are being sent to detention camps. Audience: all persons of Japanese ancestry. Point of view: the United States feared that there may have been Japanese spies, and so President Roosevelt signed this order to relocate the Japanese.
Here is our second document, Civilian Conservation Corps Poster, 1938. For the situation, the Civilian Conservation Corps created a poster which illustrates the military model of everyday life. Some everyday life activities include working with the environment and developing infrastructure. The purpose was to address the two major problems during the Depression, which are the male youth unemployment and environmental degradation. Additionally, the target audience were the young men, while for the point of view, the poster is a win-and-win situation, as it can motivate young men to work on the environment while at the same time they get benefits. Some of the benefits they earned were a monthly pay of $30 and a room and a board.
Don't forget to leave a like on this video and hit that follow button.